Hello and welcome back to Fasten Like Nails, the official podcast for Lamplighter Ministries. Today we have Mark Hamby and Shad Bolen in the studio, and we are continuing a conversation from last week about facing your giants. Now Mark, Shad, we have a new audio drama coming out, The Giant Killer. Would you mind sharing a little bit about the story with us?
You know, before we even start talking about the story, I'd rather go into the scriptures, talk a little bit about the giants that will lead into the story. Can we do that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so one of my favorite giant stories is in the book of Joshua, chapter 14 and 15. We alluded to that a little bit last week, just briefly, where Caleb comes and says, "Give me this mountain." I love that phrase.
Mm-hmm.
Men of God, it's hard to find men of God today. It's hard to find men who act like men.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's twice in the scriptures, maybe 3 times that phrase occurs. I think it occurs in Job. I think it occurs in Chronicles or Kings, and it occurs in the New Testament.
1 Corinthians 16.
3 times.
Mm-hmm.
Act like men, okay?
There's like a locker room smell to that, isn't it?
Act like men. And then the New Testament kind of gives the balance, though. But before we give the balance of the New Testament, I just want to, that first time it's coined, well, besides Job, but in Kings or Chronicles, it's a Philistine that's quoting it.
Mm-hmm.
So I picture these Philistines. They're rough and gruff, and act like men, And today, we have an internship program here at Lamplighter. 90% of the applicants that we have here at Lamplighter are ladies, and they're wonderful. They do. I tell you what, I praise God because we are living in the day of the judges, where God had to raise up women in order to do a man's role, and that ought not to be.
Mm-hmm.
But God has blessed us with young ladies that come here on an internship program, and they are greatly used of God. And I think it shames the young men that are not fulfilling their role today because they're watching video games and playing games, and they're not growing up to be like men.
Well, one of the great strategies of the devil is to attack the image of God by attacking the differences in gender.
Shad, I can't believe you just said that. I just learned this morning. One of our old interns has been here, and he's learning Hebrew right now. He shared with me that the word for man and the word for woman both have a yod, which is Hebrew letter. That's the first letter in the word for Yahweh, for God, and the woman has the second letter, Yah. And so this word for man and woman has the word Yahweh inserted in it, or the word Yah for Yahweh, okay? And he was telling me that when you remove those letters, okay, that are distinctive for both a man and a woman, so they both have a distinctive letter. Other than that, the letters are exactly the same. When you take the distinctiveness of their letters out of their name, the word forms the word fire. That blew me away because when we live within our distinctive characteristics within the image of God, the way God created us, masculinity and femininity, there's a harmony that God uses because we reflect His image in marriage. When those distinctives are taken out of even the word,
right,
it brings fire and conflict.
And so to be made in the image of God means to be made in the likeness of God. And so God is Father, and then there's Son, and then there's the Holy Spirit. Now, what is the Bible calls the Holy Spirit a helper.
Comforter.
The Bible also calls a woman a helper to her husband. And so not only are we as individuals made in the image of God, but a family is made in the image of the Trinity. There's 3 parts. And when we get jealous over one person's role and leave our role, we distort the image of God. That would be just like Jesus being jealous of God the Father and trying to take over His spot.
It doesn't even have to be jealous. It could be envious. It could be
Right.
It could be almost a sense of, I don't want this role. I don't want to be in this role right now, so I want to live independently of the role that God's given me. That creates the fire. That creates the conflict. When a man and a woman start living each other's roles, it only brings confusion. And that's what's happening today. I have young men that are becoming complacent. They're no longer the warriors. I love what, and I'm probably going to say this in probably every third broadcast, but I love what Robert Lewis wrote. A real man of God has a will to obey, a work to do, a woman to love. Then he rejects passivity, accepts responsibility, leads courageously, and expects the greater reward for doing so. That changes a person's life. Robert Lewis's dad was an alcoholic and broke his mother's neck in a fight, a drunken fight one night. And he got to see this. And Robert Lewis, I'll never forget, in his book, Raising a Modern Day Knight, he said, I watched this growing up as a child. I watched masculinity completely out of sync with the image of God. And he said, you would think that someone like myself would be somewhat of a basket case in knowing how to live my life, and yet I'm a pastor of this church. And he said, I have been looking for role models all my life. And he says, it wasn't until I found the role model that I needed that I could become the man of God that I needed to become. He said, guess who I found as my role model? His name was Jesus Christ. He's a man's man, And so for the young men that are listening out there, it is so important to really understand the concept of biblical manhood. John Piper wrote a book called What's the Difference? I highly recommend a book like that as well. And they can find that at Lamplighter if they can't find it on Amazon somewhere.
Everything that you two are talking about really reminds me of Fidus from The Giant Killer. And it's a really powerful allegory for young men in order to rise up to manhood, because it talks about these different giants that we have to deal with in our life.
Shad, that's awesome. You and I were here when they were recording it. And it reminds me of Caleb in Joshua chapter 14 and 15, because this is a man's man. Give me this mountain, right? Now listen to this. You ready for this? This is in chapter 15. He says this, verse 14 of chapter 15 of Joshua. And Caleb drove out from there the three sons of Anak, Shishai and Ahiman and Talmai, the descendants of Anak. And he went up from there against the inhabitants of Debir. Now the name of Debir formerly was Kiriath Sepher. Now, that might not seem like a whole lot, but listen to this. I think this is one of the best parts of this passage in Joshua. Kiriath Sepher literally means the city of scrolls, or the city of the books. Joshua and Caleb know that this mountain where the giants reside, this mountain is necessary, essential for them to conquer, because this is where all of the ancient depository of all of the educational books, this is where they reside. In the very first place he wants to go for is where the books are being stored. The books that probably date all the way back from the time of Noah. So this is an important place, and Caleb knows that the reservoir of knowledge is essential for his own children. And he says, give me this mountain, Kiriath Sepher, the city of the books. And I think in the image-saturated culture that we live in today, weekends come and people want to watch something. We live in an image-saturated culture,
Right.
And as a result of that, people are being lulled to sleep, or as you've heard me say so many times, we're amusing ourselves to death.
Yeah. So like the first point, the real masculine heart of the New Testament is in 1 Corinthians 16, 13, and 14.
What's it say?
The first part says, be watchful. Or some versions translate, be on the alert. And most men today are asleep, or were passive. And if you look in the garden, that was Adam's original sin. He was not protecting his wife when he should have been. If you think about it, Eve did not hear God say, don't eat the fruit of this tree. She got the command from her husband. And so when Satan come to tempt Eve, Adam was right there. In Genesis chapter 3, verse 8, Eve gave some of the fruit to her husband who was with her. And so he was there being passive the whole time, listening to Satan tempt his wife, and he didn't stand up and protect her. And men today are passive and asleep because they have not taken hold of the knowledge, the education. They don't know why things work the way they do. They don't have true biblical wisdom, which is skill for living. And they don't have anything to give the people that they're supposed to be discipling. They don't have anything to give them.
That kind of reminds me of, if we continue in this story here of Joshua 15, notice what happens here. Now, I think this goes right along with what you just said. So here's Caleb, give me this mountain. He goes up and he wants Kiriath Sepher, the city of the books. He wants what's best for his family, right? He's a warrior, okay? Now, sometimes men who are warriors, we get so caught up in the battle, who do we leave behind?
Our family.
Our families. Watch what happens next here. You ready for this? Verse 17. Anyway, so I love this. Verse 16. And Caleb said, whoever strikes Kiriath Sepher and captures it, to him I'll give Achsah, my daughter, as wife. Okay, so here's this nice dad saying, like, okay, you guys go and conquer this mountain with me, and whoever helps me out to do this, I'm going to give you my favorite daughter, okay? Right. Now, Achsah comes along the scene, and she's there, and this man whose name is Othniel, okay? I kind of picture Othniel as a little bit of a, I don't know, just kind of a giant in his own right, but kind of a slug. So he's like Othniel, verse 17, the son of Kenaz, the brother of Caleb, captured it, and Caleb gave Asa his daughter as a wife. So the very next thing that happens after he gives his daughter to this man in marriage, it says, and when she came to him, she urged him, this is Caleb, to ask her father for a field. Now, I would think that Othniel would have been going asking the father for the field, right? I kind of picture Othniel kind of laying back on the couch, clicking the TV.
Caleb's daughter's just like him, isn't he?
Yeah, she's a fighter, isn't she?
Yeah.
And she realizes that what she got for her wedding day present, do you know what he gave her? Notice what it is. It's the Negev. It's the Southland. He gave her a desert. It's like all this land he gave her, but there's one thing missing, water. You can't have a garden without water. And she recognizes what her dad did. Her dad is not thinking this through. He thought he'd just give her all this land, but he gave her land without water. And she says this in verse 18, when she came to him, she urged him and asked her father for a field, and she got off of her donkey, and Caleb said to her, what do you want? Now, what was unusual about this is that in this day, it was not improper, but she would have stayed on the donkey. But she gets off. When her father sees her get off the donkey and going to him, he realizes, like, uh-oh, I gotta deal with my daughter right now. And I think God sometimes gives us daughters like that. I have a daughter like this. Like, I love my daughter dearly, but I'm telling you, if she was coming at me and looking at me like, uh-oh, what'd I do, So she says this. She got off her donkey, and Caleb said to her, what do you want? And she said to him, give me what?
A blessing.
That's what our children want. They don't want land. They want a blessing. The land that's just an afterthought. Our kids, the things of this world, our kids will enjoy those things, but what they really want from us is our blessing. That's what Jacob was looking for. That's what Esau was looking for. And they were getting it in all the wrong places. And this little girl, she realizes that her dad has not really thought this through of what was important to her.
So, Mark, if somebody's listening to this broadcast and they say, okay, Mark, I hear what you're saying, but what exactly is a blessing?
Oh, that is an amazing question. Let's save that. I'm going to get to that. Verse 19, she said to him, give me a blessing, since you have given me the land of the Negev. Negev is the desert land. It's the south. Give me also what?
The springs of water.
Springs of water. That's what she wants. And he gave her the upper springs and the lower springs. Okay? Now, what was Jacob looking for? He's looking for a blessing, right? And he's looking for it in all the wrong places. If I can just get the second wife, I'll get my blessing. If I can just get more sheep, I'm going to get more of my uncle's flock, then I'll be blessed. If I can get my brother's birthright, then I'll be blessed. He's always looking for something extra, something that he didn't have, something he didn't hold on to. When Jacob finally gets to the place in his life where he's realizing that all the things that he's gotten has not truly satisfied him or fulfilled him, it has not filled the void in his life, he finally realizes something's wrong and he's got to go back home and face what he left behind. 20 years earlier, his brother said, I'm going to kill you. He stole the birthright, deceived for the blessing, and the last thing he heard was, obey my voice and go, my son. Now he's with Laban for 14 years. Now another 6, he's there for 20. And during this time, he's got 2 wives. And the first wife, Leah, who was the one that had a weak eye, she was not the pretty one.
Right.
He wanted Rachel. And Leah names her children, maybe God will see me now, or maybe my husband will see me now. Maybe God and my husband will hear me now. Maybe God or my husband will love me now. Okay? So she's trying to get Jacob's attention through having more children. She does all these things to get his attention, to gain his love and his affection. And she is looking for it in all the wrong places. You're not going to get that from your husband. Jacob, you're not going to get that from another wife. You're not going to get that from more sheep and a better career. You're going to get that in one place. And finally, Leah has a son, and she names him Judah. Judah comes from the root word hand, a hand that's raised. It literally means celebrated and to praise. Leah comes to the place in her life where she realizes finally, my husband's not going to fill my life, God is. And she names Judah, whom Christ, the Messiah, is going to come from, his line, and she names him praise and celebrated because I'm no longer hoping that my husband's going to fill my life and fill the void in my life. And I think the blessing is really when we're able to give to our children that unconditional love, and we show them that it's not about us. It is about this great God that we serve, and we turn them to the God that can fill all of their needs.
Okay, so we're counseling this couple a couple days ago, maybe 4 or 5 days ago. Been having the awfulest marriage for 4 or 5 years, to the point of divorce. The husband just has had an affair with somebody at work. And so we're counseling them. Tears are coming down the wife's face. And my wife looks at her and says, I had to realize after maybe a year and a half, maybe 2 years of my marriage with Shad, that he could not be my fulfillment. He could not meet my needs. He could not be my joy. I had to get that from the Lord. That's exactly what we're talking about here.
Absolutely.
And there's so many Christian marriages out there that have bought into the world's pattern, the 50-50 model. I'll do my half if you do your half. Mm-hmm. And the Bible teaches 100-100. Mm-hmm. You do your job whether the other person does or not, and you get your joy and your fulfillment from the Lord, and therefore you get your blessing from the Lord, and you can pass it on to your children.
Absolutely. And when you live like that, the joy of the Lord really becomes your strength.
Yeah. You stole the words right out of my mouth, Mark. The joy of the Lord really is our strength. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Shad, for joining us. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in to this episode of Fasten Like Nails. You can find this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, and lamplighter.net/podcast. And if you want to dig more into this topic, check out our resource, Raising a Modern Day Knight by Robert Lewis. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please tune in next week. We'll see you then. God bless.
The burners could not break his will. The darkness would not fill his soul. For even in the enchanted city, Scarboy could remember the words of his mother. Stories of another kingdom. A land where you could feel grass beneath your feet, and light to guide one's path. Where the king ruled with love, not fear and terror. As the city's power fails, Scarboy seizes what may be his last opportunity to escape. The risk is great, but he knows within his heart that freedom is worth any price. Enter the kingdom for yourself when you listen to the Lamplighter audio classic, Tales of the Kingdom, available at lamplighter.net. That's lamplighter.net. Or call us at 1-888-A-GOSPEL. That's 1-888, the letter A, Gospel.